Dr. Amy Carter stepped off the shuttle and looked around at the alien world. The jungle moon of Kepler 442c stretched out before her team like a green ocean. Tall trees reached up to the purple sky, and strange sounds came from the thick forest. Amy pulled her gloves tight and checked her equipment. She had trained for this moment for 10 years. Today, humans would try to talk to the Varakthi for the first time. Every other alien race in the galaxy was afraid of them. The Varakthi were the top hunters in space. They had never made friends with anyone. "Stay close to the camp," Jake Sullivan said as he powered down the shuttle. The pilot was a big man with steady hands and a calm voice. "These things can kill us in seconds." Ben Rodriguez, their security chief, was already setting up weapons around their small base. "I still think this is crazy," he said. "No one has ever talked to these cats and lived to tell about it." Lisa Morgan was busy with her communication equipment. She was their language expert, but even she looked worried. "The computer says they talk with their minds," she said. "I have no idea how to translate thoughts." Amy knew her team was scared. She was scared too. But humanity needed this. Every other race in space looked at humans like they were weak prey animals. If they could make friends with the Varakthi, everything would change. The first day passed quietly. They saw movement in the trees, but no actual Varakthi. Amy studied the data they had collected. The Varakthi looked like giant black cats with crystal bones that glowed blue. They were 3 times bigger than humans and could speak to each other without making sounds. On the second day, Amy heard something new. Soft mewing sounds came from the edge of the forest. She grabbed her scanner and walked slowly toward the noise. Through her equipment, she could see 3 small heat signatures hiding behind a fallen tree. "Babies," she whispered into her radio. "There are Varakthi babies out here." Jake's voice crackled back. "Get away from there." Where babies are, parents follow. But Amy could not help herself. The sounds the babies made reminded her of Earth kittens. She had always loved animals, and these were just scared children, hiding from strangers. She moved closer, making soft, cooing sounds to show she meant no harm. 3 small heads poked up over the log. The Varakthi cubs were beautiful. Their fur was soft, black with silver spots, and their crystal bones glowed soft blue in the dim light. They were about the size of earth lions but moved like house cats. Big golden eyes stared at Amy with curiosity. Amy sat down and stayed very still. One of the braver cubs crept closer. It sniffed the air and tilted its head. Amy slowly held out her hand to show she was friendly. The cub's eyes locked onto her gloves. The thick white gloves had sensors built into them to help her study alien life. The cub made a soft chirping sound and reached out with one paw to touch the glove. Amy smiled and let the cub explore her hand. The other 2 cubs came closer, their fear turning into playful curiosity. They had never seen anything like humans before. One of them patted her glove with both paws like it was a toy. "Cute little guys," Amy said softly. She was so focused on the cubs that she did not notice the adult Varakthi moving through the trees around her. The cubs started to play more roughly. They grabbed at her gloves with their mouths, thinking it was a game. Amy tried to pull her hands back gently, but the cubs thought she was playing too. "Easy there," Amy said. But the cubs were getting excited. One of them bit down on her left glove and pulled hard. The sensor glove was not meant to handle that kind of force. It stretched and then tore free from her hand. The cub stumbled backward with the glove in its mouth, looked surprised for a moment, then swallowed it whole. Amy stared in shock. No, that was important equipment. The other 2 cubs saw what happened and wanted to play the same game. Before Amy could stop them, they had grabbed her right glove and were fighting over it. In seconds, they had torn it apart and eaten the pieces. Amy held up her bare hands and looked at them. Her expensive sensor gloves were gone, eaten by alien babies who thought they were treats. "Jake is going to kill me," she muttered. That was when she heard the growl. Amy turned around slowly and saw them. 3 adult Varakthi stood at the edge of the clearing. They were huge, bigger than any earth animal she had ever seen. Their crystal bones glowed angry, red instead of blue. Their golden eyes were locked on Amy and their cubs. The cubs ran to their parents, making excited chirping sounds. They were trying to tell the adults about their fun game with the strange creature. But the adult Varakthi did not look happy at all. Amy felt something pressing against her mind. The adults were trying to communicate with her through telepathy, but all she could sense was anger and confusion. Their mental voices felt like thunder in her head. One of the adults stepped forward. Its mouth opened to show teeth as long as Amy's fingers. A low rumble came from its chest. Amy could not understand the thoughts it was sending, but the message was clear enough. She had done something very wrong. Jake's voice came through her radio. "Amy, we see them on the scanner. Get back here now." But Amy could not move. The Varakthi had surrounded her. More adults emerged from the forest. She counted 8 of them, all staring at her with those burning golden eyes. The cubs were still playing near her feet, but now they seemed different. They kept looking at her bare hands and making soft sounds that might have been guilt or shame. One of them pawed at her leg like it was trying to apologize. Amy realized she had made a terrible mistake. In human culture, losing gloves was just annoying. But these were aliens with their own rules and customs. Maybe eating her gloves meant something important to them. Maybe she had accidentally started a war. The largest Varakthi, a female with scars on her face, approached Amy. Her mind voice was so loud and angry that Amy fell to her knees holding her head. Even without understanding the words, Amy knew she was in serious trouble. Ben's voice came through the radio. "I'm coming with weapons." "No." She was right. The moment Ben appeared at the tree line with his rifle, every adult Varakthi turned toward him and snarled. Their crystal bones blazed, bright red, like warning lights. Amy stood up slowly and held out her bare hands to show she was not armed. The cubs had eaten her gloves, and now she stood defenseless before the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. Whatever happened next would decide if humanity lived or died on this world. The largest female Varakthi stepped closer to Amy. Her crystal bones pulsed red with anger as her mind pressed against Amy's thoughts. Amy could not understand the alien words, but the emotion was clear. Rage, disappointment, something that felt like betrayal. Behind the big female, more Varakthi emerged from the jungle. Amy counted 12 adults now, all staring at her with golden eyes that burned like fire. Their cubs huddled together near Amy's feet, making small, worried sounds. Jake and Ben waited at the edge of the camp with their weapons ready, but Amy waved them back. Starting a fight would get everyone killed. These creatures could tear through their camp in minutes. The scarred female made a sound like grinding stone. Other Varakthi answered with similar calls. They were talking, but Amy could only catch pieces of their mind speech. Images flashed in her head. The cubs eating her gloves. Shame. Honor. Some kind of debt that needed to be paid. Lisa's voice crackled through the radio. "Amy, I'm getting something from their communications. They think you did this on purpose. They think you let the cubs dishonor themselves." Amy tried to send peaceful thoughts back to the Varakthi, but her human mind was too different. All she could project was confusion and fear. The female leader snarled and showed her massive teeth. More images flooded Amy's mind. She saw the Varakthi culture through their eyes. Honor was everything to them. Parents protected their young from making mistakes that could bring shame to their family. When cubs did something wrong, the adults who allowed it had to pay the price. Amy understood now. The cubs had eaten her gloves, which was some kind of insult or crime in Varakthi society. Because Amy had not stopped them, she was responsible for their shameful behavior. The angry thoughts from the adults made it clear that someone had to be punished. The female leader sent more images. Amy saw herself standing before a council of Varakthi elders. She saw a trial where her crimes would be judged. Then she saw herself facing something huge and dark in a place of shadows and death. "They want to put me on trial," Amy said into her radio. Jake's voice was tight with worry. "We're getting you out of here." "No," Amy said. "If I run now, they'll think all humans are cowards. This might be our only chance to prove we belong in space." The Varakthi were still sending images. Amy saw other alien races that had tried to contact them before. All had failed because they could not understand Varakthi honor. The creatures showed her pictures of weak species that ran away when faced with their justice. In the Varakthi mind, those races deserved no respect. But Amy also saw something else. Deep in the alien thoughts was a small spark of curiosity. These creatures had never met anything like humans before. Amy's willingness to face their justice instead of running was something new. The female leader stepped back and made a series of complex growls. The other adults formed a circle around Amy and began what looked like a ritual. They swayed back and forth while making deep humming sounds. Their crystal bones changed color from red to blue to white. More Varakthi appeared from the jungle. Amy realized she was seeing their entire tribe. Old ones with white fur and bones that glowed like stars. Warriors with battle scars and proud stances. Mothers carrying tiny cubs on their backs. They all came to witness whatever was about to happen. The eldest Varakthi, an ancient female whose bones shone like diamonds, approached the circle. When she moved, all the others stepped aside with respect. This was their leader, the one who made the final decisions for their people. The old female looked at Amy with eyes that had seen centuries of life and death. Her mind touch was different from the others. Where they projected anger, she sent only cold judgment. She studied Amy like a scientist examining a new species. Images flowed between them. Amy saw the crime again through Varakthi eyes. The cubs had taken and consumed something that belonged to her. In their culture, this was like stealing someone's honor and eating it. The shame would follow the cubs for their entire lives unless the debt was repaid. The ancient leader showed Amy the law. When cubs brought shame on themselves, the adult who allowed it must hunt the shadow worm with only their bare hands. If they succeeded, the cub's honor would be restored. If they failed, the shame would be forgotten in their death. Amy felt her heart stop. The shadow worm was a legend among space travelers. It was a creature of pure nightmare that lived in the darkest places of this moon. No one had ever killed one and returned to tell about it. The Varakthi sent her images of the beast, and Amy nearly fainted from fear. The shadow worm was huge, bigger than any of the adult Varakthi. It could disappear and reappear like a ghost. Its touch brought madness and death. Even the bravest Varakthi warriors feared to hunt it alone. "They want me to hunt something called a shadow worm," Amy said into her radio. "With my bare hands." Ben's voice exploded through the speaker. "That's insane. Tell them no." But Amy was thinking. She looked down at her bare hands, the same hands the cubs had left empty when they ate her gloves. These hands had always been her greatest tools. As a child, she had built models and machines. In college, she had performed delicate surgery on injured animals. Her hands could do things that claws and teeth could not. The ancient female was still watching her. In those old eyes, Amy saw a test. This was not just about the cub's honor. The Varakthi wanted to know what humans were made of. Were they another weak species that would beg for mercy? Or were they something different? Amy thought about humanity's place in the galaxy. Every other race looked at humans as prey animals, too weak to fight, too primitive to be useful allies. If she could prove that humans were brave enough to face the shadow worm, everything would change. The most feared predators in space might accept humans as equals. She also thought about the cubs. They were just children who had made a mistake while playing. Their entire lives would be marked by shame unless she did this. Amy had always protected the innocent, and these alien babies were innocent too. "I accept," Amy said, both to her radio and to the Varakthi. Jake's voice was desperate. "Amy, don't do this. We can find another way." The ancient female tilted her head as Amy's words reached her mind. Surprise flickered in those ancient eyes. In all her long life, she had never seen a creature so small and weak accept such a challenge. Most beings begged for mercy or tried to offer tribute instead. The other Varakthi were equally shocked. Their growls turned to whispers as they discussed this strange development. Some seemed impressed by Amy's courage. Others thought she was simply too stupid to understand what she had agreed to do. The cubs were making distressed sounds. They seemed to understand that Amy was going to face danger because of their mistake. One of them approached and gently touched her bare hand with its nose. Amy felt a flash of the cub's emotions: guilt, worry, and something that might have been affection. 3 days, the ancient female projected into Amy's mind. You have 3 days to prepare. On the 4th day, Amy's mind, in the signed. You enter the Shadowlands. Return with proof of the worm's death, and the cub's shame will be forgotten. Fail, and you will feed the darkness forever. Amy nodded. 3 days to figure out how to kill the most dangerous predator on this moon, using nothing but her bare hands and human intelligence. It should have been impossible, but Amy was already thinking of plans. As the Varakthi began to disperse, the cubs lingered near Amy. They seemed reluctant to leave her side. The guilt in their large eyes was heartbreaking. Amy knelt down and gently touched the head of the cub that had eaten her first glove. It's not your fault, she whispered, though she knew it could not understand her words. You were just curious. I would have done the same thing when I was young. The cub made a soft purring sound and pressed against her hand. For a moment, the fear left Amy's heart. Whatever happened in the Shadowlands, she would face it, knowing she was protecting these innocent creatures. Jake and Ben reached her as the last Varakthi disappeared into the jungle. Both men looked pale and worried. There has to be another way, Jake said. We can negotiate with them. Amy stood up and looked at her bare hands. No. This is our chance to show the galaxy what humans are capable of. We don't have claws or armor or energy weapons. But we have something else. We have the ability to think our way out of impossible situations. Lisa joined them, her equipment beeping with recorded data. I've been analyzing their communications, she said. The shadow worm isn't just any predator. It's something they consider almost divine. No. Varakthi has killed one in over 1,000 years. Amy smiled grimly. Then I guess it's time to show them what human determination can do. Amy spent the first day studying everything they knew about the shadow worm. The data was mostly legends and half-remembered stories from other alien races. The creature lived in the deepest parts of the moon's cave system, where no light ever reached. It could phase in and out of reality, making it nearly impossible to track or fight. The few survivors who claimed to see one described it as living shadow, Lisa said, reading from her translation files. It feeds on fear and can drive victims insane just by being near them. Jake shook his head. This is suicide, Amy. Even if you could find it, how do you fight something made of shadow? Why? Amy sat by their campfire, staring at her bare hands in the flickering light. Every creature has weaknesses, she said. We just need to find them. On the 2nd day, Amy began preparing for the hunt. She studied the terrain around the Shadowlands, memorized the cave maps their probes had created, and practiced moving silently through the jungle. Her team wanted to give her weapons, but the Varakthi law was clear. Only bare hands were allowed. That evening, Amy noticed she was being watched. The 3 Varakthi cubs sat at the edge of their camp, golden eyes fixed on her every move. They had been following her all day, staying just far enough away to avoid the human guards. They feel guilty, Lisa observed. I'm picking up their emotional broadcasts. They understand that you're going into danger because of what they did. Amy walked slowly toward the cubs. They did not run away this time. The smallest one, the female who had eaten Amy's first glove, crept closer and made soft mewing sounds. I know you're sorry, Amy said gently. But this isn't really your fault. Your people and mine just don't understand each other yet. Doc. The cubs seemed to understand her tone, if not her words. They moved closer, and Amy sat down so they would not be afraid. The little female touched Amy's bare hand with her paw, being very careful not to use her claws. That night, Amy dreamed of shadows and ancient fears. She woke before dawn, with a plan forming in her mind. If the shadow worm was made of darkness and fed on fear, then light and courage might be her weapons. On the third day, Amy gathered materials from around their camp. She made simple tools from metal scraps and wired them to her team's portable power cells. She also collected chemical packets from their emergency supplies and fashioned them into crude devices. "What are you building?" Ben asked, as Amy worked on her makeshift equipment. "Light sources," Amy said, "and a few surprises. If this thing is really made of shadow, then bright light might hurt it." Jake looked skeptical. "Those power cells won't last long. Maybe an hour. At full brightness. Then I better work fast," Amy replied. As the sun set on the third day, Amy stood at the edge of the Shadowlands. The entrance to the cave system yawned before her, like a hungry mouth. No light penetrated more than a few feet into the darkness beyond. The Varakthi tribe had gathered to witness her departure. The ancient female leader stood at the front of the group, her diamond bones glowing softly in the twilight. Behind her, dozens of adult Varakthi watched in silence. The three cubs pushed through the crowd to reach Amy. They seemed desperate to tell her something, making urgent chirping sounds and pawing at her legs. Amy knelt down and let them approach. The little female cub pressed something into Amy's hand. It was a small piece of crystal, the same material as their bones. It was warm and pulsed with soft blue light. The other cubs had similar gifts, more crystal fragments that glowed like tiny stars. "They're giving you light," Lisa whispered in amazement. "They broke off pieces of their own bones to help you." Amy felt tears in her eyes. These alien children had mutilated themselves to give her weapons against the darkness. She carefully tucked the crystal fragments into her pockets, next to her crude light devices. "Thank you," she said to the cubs. "I promise I'll come back." Amy turned and walked into the Shadowlands. The darkness swallowed her like a living thing. Behind her, the voices of the Varakthi faded to nothing. Ahead lay only the unknown. The caves were worse than Amy had imagined. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Strange sounds echoed from the depths, scraping, slithering, and something that might have been laughter. Her footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Amy activated one of her improvised light sources. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing twisted rock formations and pools of black water. She moved carefully, following the map she had memorized. The shadow worm was said to live in the deepest chamber, where the cave system reached the moon's core. After an hour of walking, Amy heard something following her. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind moving through empty spaces. She turned, but her light revealed nothing behind her except more darkness. The temperature dropped as she went deeper. Amy's breath came out in white clouds. Ice began to form on the walls around her, and the crystal fragments from the cubs grew brighter in response to the cold. Then she saw it. The shadow worm was everything the stories had described, and worse. It was huge, at least 20 feet long, but its shape kept changing. Sometimes, it looked like a giant snake made of liquid darkness. Other times, it resembled a spider with too many legs. Its eyes were the only constant feature, burning red points in the shifting shadow of its body. Amy's first instinct was to run. The creature radiated pure terror like a physical force. Her hands shook as she raised her light device. The beam struck the worm, and it shrieked in pain and rage. Where the light touched it, the shadow flesh bubbled and steamed. But the creature was fast. It flowed around the light beam and struck at Amy from the side. She dove away, feeling claws of solid darkness rake across her back. Her jacket tore, but the thick fabric saved her from serious injury. Amy rolled to her feet and activated a second light source. Now she had two beams crossing the cavern, creating barriers of brightness that the worm could not cross. But her power cells were already running low. She had maybe 30 minutes before the lights died. The shadow worm circled her, looking for an opening. It was smart, Amy realized. Not just an animal, but a cunning predator that had survived for centuries by outsmarting its prey. It was testing her defenses, learning how her light weapons worked. Amy tried to drive it back with concentrated beams, but the creature was too quick. It flowed like water around her attacks, always staying just out of reach. When she moved to pursue it, the worm would vanish completely, only to reappear behind her seconds later. After 10 minutes of this deadly dance, Amy understood the problem. She was playing the creature's game, reacting to its moves, instead of making her own plans. That was not how humans fought. Humans were tool users and problem solvers. They did not rely on strength or speed but on intelligence and preparation. Amy stopped chasing the worm and instead began to study the cavern. The walls were covered with ice, which could reflect light. The ceiling had stalactites that could fall if the right pressure was applied. Most importantly, there was a pattern to the creature's movements. It preferred certain areas and avoided others. The worm sensed her change in tactics and became more aggressive. It rushed at her in a straight line, trying to overwhelm her defenses. Amy was ready. She aimed her lights at the icy walls, reflecting and multiplying the beams until the entire cavern blazed with brightness. The shadow worm screamed and recoiled, its form becoming more solid as the light burned away its shadow flesh. For the first time, Amy could see its true shape. A serpentine creature, with crystalline scales that had been corrupted by centuries of darkness. But Amy's power cells were dying. The reflected light began to fade as her devices ran out of energy. The worm sensed victory and prepared for a final attack. That was when Amy pulled out the crystal fragments the cubs had given her. She threw them at the walls around the cavern, where they shattered and released stored energy in brilliant flashes of blue light. The worm had never encountered Varakthi bone crystal before. The light was different from Amy's devices, purer and more intense. The creature thrashed in agony as the crystal light burned through its corrupted flesh. But Amy could see that even this would not be enough to kill it. The fragments would burn out in minutes, and then she would be defenseless in the dark. She needed a better plan, and she needed it fast. The crystal fragments blazed like tiny suns against the cavern walls, but Amy could see their light already beginning to fade. The shadow worm writhed in pain, its dark form becoming more solid as the Varakthi bone light burned away its shadow flesh. She had maybe 2 minutes before the crystals died and left her defenseless. Amy studied the creature more carefully now that she could see its true form. Under the corruption of darkness, it had once been something like the Varakthi themselves, a predator with crystal bones and sleek fur. But centuries in the shadows had twisted it into something else. Its bones were black instead of blue, and its fur had become patches of living shadow. The worm was learning to avoid the worst of the crystal light, staying just at the edge of the bright zones. It was still dangerous, still deadly, but Amy could see intelligence in its burning red eyes. This creature was not just a monster, it was a prisoner, trapped by the very darkness that gave it power. Amy's training as a xenobiologist kicked in. Every species had evolved for a purpose. What had the shadow worm been before the corruption took hold? What did it need to survive? The answer came to her as she watched the creature flinch away from the brightest crystal. It was not just avoiding pain, it was avoiding healing. The light hurt because it was burning away corruption that had become part of the creature's identity. The worm was afraid of becoming what it used to be. One of the crystal fragments guttered and went dark. The worm immediately flowed toward that section of wall, testing Amy's defenses. She backed away, but there was nowhere left to go. The cavern was large, but not infinite. Soon she would be trapped against the far wall, with no way to escape. That was when Amy heard new sounds echoing from the cave entrance. Soft mewing cries that she recognized immediately. The three cubs had followed her into the Shadowlands. "No," Amy whispered. "Go back. It's not safe." But the cubs kept coming, their own bone crystals glowing blue in the darkness. They had broken more pieces from their young bones to bring her additional light. Amy felt sick at the thought of them hurting themselves for her. But she also felt a desperate relief. With more light sources, she might have a chance. The shadow worm heard the cubs approaching and turned toward them with interest. Its red eyes blazed brighter as it sensed easier prey. These small creatures would be much simpler to kill than the strange human with her tools and tricks. Amy's protective instincts flared. The cubs had made a mistake by following her, but they were still children. She would not let this monster harm them because of her failure to keep them safe. "Over here!" Amy shouted, throwing one of her deadlight devices at the worm. "Fight me, not them." The creature ignored her. It began flowing toward the cubs, who had stopped at the cavern entrance and were making frightened sounds. They had expected to help Amy, not face the legendary shadow worm themselves. Amy did the only thing she could think of. She ran directly at the worm, bare hands outstretched, and threw herself onto its back. The moment Amy touched the creature, pain exploded through her mind. The worm's corruption tried to flow into her, filling her thoughts with centuries of hunger and madness. She saw flashes of its past. A proud Varakthi warrior who had entered these caves long ago to prove his worth. The darkness had taken him slowly, feeding on his fears and anger, until nothing remained but shadow and rage. But Amy's mind was different from anything the worm had encountered before. Human thoughts were chaotic and creative in ways that alien minds were not. Instead of being overwhelmed by the creature's memories, Amy began to understand them. The warrior's name had been Kethvar, and he had been trying to protect his own cubs when the corruption took him. He had faced the previous shadow worm in this same cavern and won, but the victory had cost him everything. The darkness that killed his enemy had infected him, turning him into the very monster he had fought. Amy held onto the creature as it thrashed, trying to throw her off. Her bare hands found the spots where its crystal bones were most corrupted. She could feel the clean bone underneath the shadow flesh, still pure after all these centuries. "I know who you were," Amy said, her words echoing in both her voice and her thoughts. "I know why you're trapped here. But it doesn't have to end this way." The worm's struggles slowed. It had never encountered prey that spoke to it instead of screaming in terror. Amy's thoughts were touching parts of its mind that had been buried under corruption for 1,000 years. The cubs reached the main cavern and stopped, staring in amazement at the human clinging to the legendary monster. Their bone crystals cast blue light across the scene, revealing Amy's determined face and the worm's confused red eyes. Amy pressed her hands against the creature's head, where the corruption was thickest. The darkness burned her palms, but she held on. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said. "You don't have to be hungry anymore." For the first time in centuries, the shadow worm stopped fighting. It lowered its massive head and looked directly into Amy's eyes. In those burning red depths, Amy saw the Varakthi warrior he had once been, proud, brave, and desperately lonely. "Help me," the creature whispered into her mind. Its voice was broken and sad, like wind through empty caves. "Please help me remember who I was." Amy nodded and pressed her hands more firmly against its head. The corruption fought back, sending waves of pain through both of them. But Amy held on, using her human willpower to anchor the creature's fading memories. The cubs seemed to understand what was happening. They approached slowly, their own crystal light growing brighter. When they were close enough, they gently touched their glowing bones to the worm's corrupted flesh. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Where the young, pure crystal touched the ancient corruption, clean blue light began to spread. The shadow flesh bubbled and steamed. But instead of causing pain, it brought relief. The worm's red eyes began to flicker with traces of gold. Amy felt the moment when the balance shifted. The corruption had fed on isolation and despair for so long that it could not survive contact with hope and companionship. The cub's innocent desire to help, combined with Amy's stubborn human refusal to give up, created something the darkness could not digest. Light spread across the worm's body like dawn breaking over a dark world. The shadow flesh fell away in chunks, revealing clean crystal bones underneath. Black fur became silver, and burning red eyes shifted to warm gold. When the transformation was complete, the creature that remained was magnificent. Kethvar was larger than any modern Varakthi, a warrior from an age when his people had been even more powerful. His crystal bones glowed like starlight, and his golden eyes held wisdom earned through centuries of suffering. He looked at Amy with gratitude and something that might have been love. His mental voice was warm and strong, nothing like the broken whisper of the shadow worm. "How can I ever repay such a gift?" Amy smiled and gently touched his face with her bare hands. "Just live," she said. "Live free and remember who you really are." The cubs were dancing around them, making joyful sounds. They had helped rescue a hero of their people's past. The shame of eating Amy's gloves was forgotten in the glory of this moment. But Amy could hear more sounds echoing from the cave entrance. The adult Varakthi had felt the change in the Shadowlands and were coming to investigate. Soon they would see that the human had not only survived the impossible hunt, but had accomplished something far greater. She had not killed the shadow worm. She had saved it. The sound of approaching Varakthi echoed through the cavern like rolling thunder. Amy could hear dozens of them moving through the cave system, their crystal bones glowing and their voices raised in amazement. The change in the Shadowlands had been felt throughout their territory. Kethvar raised his magnificent head and listened to the voices of his descendants. His golden eyes showed both joy and uncertainty. "They will not recognize me," he said to Amy through their mental link. "I have been their monster for so long that they may not believe I can be their hero again." Amy stood beside the ancient warrior, her bare hands still glowing with traces of crystal light from the healing process. The three cubs pressed close to her legs, purring with pride at what they had helped accomplish. "They'll understand," Amy said. "Truth has its own power." The first adult Varakthi to enter the main cavern was the scarred female who had challenged Amy 3 days earlier. She stopped at the entrance and stared in shock at the scene before her, where the terrible shadow worm had once lurked. A magnificent silver Varakthi stood beside the small human and her 3 cubs. More adults poured into the cavern behind her, including the ancient female leader whose diamond bones cast rainbow light across the walls. Their collective amazement created a wave of mental energy that Amy could feel even with her limited telepathic ability. The diamond-boned elder approached slowly, her wise eyes studying Kethvar's face. "I know you," she whispered, in the ancient dialect of her people. "Your image hangs in our Hall of Heroes. But how can this be? You died 1,000 years ago." Kethvar bowed his great head respectfully. "I did not die, honored grandmother. I was lost to the shadow that I thought I had conquered. This brave human and her young friends brought me back to the light." The elder turned her attention to Amy, who suddenly felt very small surrounded by so many powerful predators. But there was no threat in their golden eyes now. Only wonder, and something that might have been respect. "You were sent to hunt the shadow worm," the elder said. "But instead, you chose to heal it. This is not what our law required." Amy lifted her chin and met the ancient female's gaze. "Your law asked me to deal with the creature that lived in the darkness. I did that. The shadow worm is gone forever. What stands here now is Kethvar the hero, returned to his people." The cubs made excited chirping sounds and ran to their parents, eager to tell the story of how they had helped save the legendary warrior. Their mental chatter filled the cavern with images of Amy's courage and kindness. One of the adult males, a massive warrior with battle scars, stepped forward and knelt before Kethvar. "My lord," he said formally, "if you truly have returned, then you outrank us all. You are the last of the ancient bloodline. Command us." Kethvar looked uncomfortable with the sudden reverence. He had spent so long as a monster that he had forgotten what it meant to be a leader. His golden eyes sought Amy's face, asking for guidance. Amy smiled and placed her hand on his silver flank. "Tell them what you learned in the darkness," she said softly. "Tell them what you want for your people's future." The ancient warrior nodded and addressed his tribe. "I learned that isolation breeds corruption. I learned that pride, without purpose, becomes destruction. Most importantly, I learned that healing can come from the most unexpected sources." He turned to look at Amy with obvious affection. This human could have killed me and claimed the victory her law demanded. Instead, she chose compassion over conquest. She saw past the monster to find the person trapped within. This is the wisdom her people possess, the ability to find solutions where others see only problems. The elder female studied Amy with new interest. "You speak of her people. Do you mean to say that all humans possess such gifts?" "I believe they do," Kethvar replied. "Where we rely on strength and speed, they use creativity and determination. Where we see enemies to defeat, they see puzzles to solve. They could be powerful allies if we are wise enough to accept their friendship." The scarred female who had been Amy's first challenger stepped forward. "The cub's shame has been more than erased by this deed." The scarred female who had been erased by this deed. But what of the human's reward? "She has given us back our greatest hero. What can we give her in return?" Amy was about to say that friendship was reward enough, but the cubs had other ideas. The little female who had eaten Amy's first glove approached with something in her mouth. She had been carrying it since they entered the cavern, waiting for the right moment. With great ceremony, the cub placed Amy's white sensor glove at her feet. It was completely undamaged, somehow preserved perfectly in the cub's stomach until it could be returned. The other two cubs followed suit, producing the pieces of her second glove, also pristine and clean. Amy stared in amazement as the cubs reassembled her equipment. How is this possible? The elder female's eyes sparkled with ancient wisdom. Young Varakthi can store objects in a special organ without digesting them. It is how they collect treasures to give as gifts. These children never intended to destroy your gloves. They were trying to honor you by keeping them safe. Amy knelt down and carefully put her gloves back on. The sensors immediately came to life, registering the amazing crystal energies that filled the cavern. She looked at each cub in turn, understanding finally that their original act had been one of respect, not rudeness. "Thank you," she said, gently touching each small head. "I'm sorry I misunderstood." The cubs purred and pressed against her hands, their guilt finally completely washed away. Jake's voice suddenly crackled through Amy's radio. "Amy, are you alive in there? We're picking up some massive energy readings." Amy activated her communicator. "I'm fine, Jake. Better than fine. Come to the main cavern, but leave your weapons behind. We're going to need a bigger shuttle." "Tow. Why?" Jake's voice was confused. Amy looked around at the dozens of Varakthi surrounding her, then at Kethvar's noble face, and finally at the three cubs who had started this whole adventure by swallowing her gloves. "Because we're going home with the galaxy's most powerful allies," she said. "And we're going to need room for some very important passengers." The elder female stepped forward one final time. "If your people are willing," she said formally, "the Varakthi offer our friendship to humanity. We would be honored to stand beside such clever and brave creatures. In see they had by the Minipliest." End quote. Ostis keys and describes. Amy stood up and extended her bare hand to the ancient leader. The Varakthi gently touched it with one crystal claw, sealing the alliance. "My people will be honored to accept," Amy replied. Later, as the human team prepared to leave the moon, Amy sat with the three cubs one final time. They would stay with their people, but she had promised to return soon with more humans who could learn from the Varakthi. The little female cub, who had started everything by eating Amy's glove, made a soft sound and pressed something into her palm. It was a small piece of crystal, carefully broken from the cub's own growing bones. A gift of friendship and remembrance. "I'll treasure this always," Amy promised. Kethvar approached as the cubs said their goodbyes. "You gave me back my life," he said. "How can I ever repay such a gift?" Amy smiled and looked up at the magnificent creature she had helped heal. "Just remember that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make a friend instead." As their shuttle lifted off from the jungle moon, Amy looked down at the Varakthi territory. Already she could see the creatures emerging from the forests to wave goodbye. The most feared predators in the galaxy had become humanity's first true allies in space. Jake was still shaking his head in amazement. "I can't believe you pulled this off. The whole galaxy is going to change when they hear about this alliance." Amy nodded, fingering the crystal gift from her cub friend. "That was the point. Humans don't have claws or armor or energy weapons. But we have something better. We have the ability to see past appearances to the truth underneath." Ben laughed from the pilot's seat. "And apparently we taste terrible to alien cubs." "That too," Amy agreed, smiling as she remembered 3 small faces full of curiosity and mischief. The stars stretched out ahead of them. No longer a hostile wilderness, but a neighborhood where humans finally had powerful friends. And it had all started with 3 alien children who had swallowed her gloves and taught her that sometimes the biggest misunderstandings could lead to the most beautiful friendships.